Okay, go ahead.
Good evening. I would like to call this Board of Education Operations Work. Would like to bring, good evening. I would like to bring this Board of Education Operations Work Group meeting to order, dated November 11th, 2024. We have no public speakers or written statements tonight, so I'll go straight to the approval of minutes. I move to approve the minutes from the Operations Work Group meeting dated October 14th, 2024. Board Member Fernando, your advisory vote.
Second.
Aye.
Second, Board Member Pearson. Board Member Fernando's advisory vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, we have three items on the agenda tonight, starting with healthcare. So Bob, take us away.
Good evening, everybody.
Board Member Cashel, thank you. I'm gonna kick us off this evening before we get started with our Assistant Superintendent Solner to lead us off for this evening. So first and foremost, on behalf of our Superintendent, Dr. Joe Goddard, I want to take this opportunity to thank our Board of Education as well as our community for trusting us with the yes vote for our 2024 referendum. Dr. Goddard is unable to be with us here tonight as he is telling the story of MMSD at the Superintendent of the Year Gala in Washington, D.C., where he is recognized. But as an administration team, we are deeply grateful for the support of our community and the board, and we promise to keep the community closely involved as we begin this important work ahead of us. We know that this is not work that we can do alone. So we want to take an opportunity also just to really thank our Madison community and the people who voted yes in support of our students. We are committed to our ongoing partnership and with the community, including that of our Board of Education. I also just wanted to take an opportunity to take a moment to publicly thank the Madison Public School Foundation for their continuous support. Historically, the foundation has played an important role in supporting MMSD, either through the support, through the Teacher Support Network and Adopt a School program, their management of the endowment funds and the support of various educational initiatives, facilitating our community partnerships and engagement, and just supporting equity initiatives in education. The foundation has played and will continue to be a strong partner for our school, and we just look forward to continuously strengthen that relationship. So tonight, we're going to turn our attention as we begin to prepare our preparations for our 2025. This will involve the key conversations around our healthcare, our budgeting, and also our facilities. So now I turn it over to our Assistant Superintendent, Bob Solner, to get us started with this conversation.
Thank you, Dr. McRae. Suggest we want to go to the strategic framework. It's always important for us to recenter and focus our efforts, particularly on this first operations work group right after the referendum results, because we begin planning for the 25-26 school year tonight. As has been mentioned, Jennifer Trendle and her team are going to talk about health benefits, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the 24-25 budget in the context of for 25-26. The key goals are every child is on track to graduate ready for college, career, and community. That the district and every school in it is a place where children, staff, and families thrive, and African American children and youth excel in school. The goals are further enhanced with our core values of building, racial equity and social justice, voice, focus, and creativity. So Jennifer and her team are gonna take out the first section of our meeting today, talking about health insurance updates and recommendations for the board for consideration. And then I will again talk about the budget, and Scott and Jen Shepke will talk about where we are at with results of the referendum and our facilities planning, starting to already move in high gear for the work that's necessary to begin construction and bring it to 2026. We do not have any decision items that the board needs to consider for the board meeting on November 25th. So it's just, information sharing this evening. Health insurance update, Jennifer.
Thank you, Bob. I have with me tonight, Helen Brand from M3, Rachel Terabell, who is our benefits manager, and Amy Tester, who is the human resources director of operations. So our outcomes this evening are to prepare for the 25-26 employee insurance renewals. We're going to do some information sharing, which is a current overview and recent history of our health insurance premium renewals, and also discuss some high-level strategy options. And the other considerations that we're taking into account this evening are managing costs, meeting existing employee needs, and how health insurance assists with staff recruitment and retention goals. So I'm going to start off with the recommendation, which is given that the current Quartz and GHC agreement is set to expire on June 30th, 2026. MMSD in consultation with M3 recommends that we negotiate a rate increase for the current plans for 25-26, explore plan design and other changes for 25-26, and then pursue the feasibility of RFP for 2026-27. So you can do the slides, yeah. Next slide. All right. And we're ready for the next slide. So here's a snapshot of our current plan. We spend $78.3 million on health insurance for active employees, or 15% of our Fund 10 expenditures. We have 3,532 active employees currently electing our health insurance. The family premium for the Quartz HMO is $2,133.33 per month. Our premiums average between 6.6% and 7% of the total premium, and the overall range is 2.5% to 12%, depending on the employee category. It's a very generous eligibility criteria. It's 19 hours per week for a 0.5 FTE teacher contract, and it is the lowest amount of premium share and out-of-pocket costs to other large districts in Dane County. So going back and giving us a little history, before 2020-21, we had two medical plans offered, one by Dean and one by GHC. Employees could choose between the two plans. Both plans had similar benefits, and the plans competed for enrollment based on price and provider networks. In 2020, MMSD conducted a health insurance RFP. Quartz, Dean, and GHC responded. All three respondents included a dual choice and sole carrier option, and Dean and Quartz provided sole carrier options with significant premium savings. Next slide. In 2020, the district decided to remain in the dual choice arrangement with GHC and Dean. The final agreement, the final year of a 3-year agreement with a rate guarantee was through 2022-23. It provided stability for staff given the unknown impacts of COVID, provided sufficient access to providers in Dane County, and allowed MMSD to prepare for future health insurance increases. So I wanted to give you a few definitions and the health plan financial performance. Loss ratios are the most common financial metrics used to measure the financial performance of an insurance plan, and it reflects what the plan paid in claims compared to premiums collected. Local insurance providers target loss ratios between 88% and 92%. A loss ratio of over 100% means the insurer is losing money. And it also means that we lose our negotiating power. From 2020 to 2023, MMSD's loss ratios with both Dean and GHC were 100% plus and rising. Preliminary data from 2023, 24, and we're still gathering data from last year, indicates that loss rates, so that indicates that loss ratios with Dean and courts continue to be well above 100%. And I'm going to ask Rachel to give us a little bit of a definition about how that the loss ratios lag.
Sure. So good evening, everybody. I'm Rachel Carabell, the benefits manager. One of the challenges in determining loss ratios is that the carriers, there's a lag in the amount of time between when services are provided and when the claims. So we're always looking at least 3 to 4 months after the fact. So at this time, the only claims data the insurers are able to provide to us is through June of 2024. And so all of this data, even though it is continuing to show that loss ratios are well above 100%, that does not reflect the large rate increases that we received starting in July of this year. So we don't know how those increases are impacting loss ratios.
Thank you.
Mhm.
The next slide is our historical renewal rates and our plan changes in 2023-24. We saw a significant increase and a change from GHC to courts. And then in 24-25, which is our current plan year, we saw double-digit increases from both courts and Dean. We've had no plan changes since 2021, which are keeping some of our premiums a little bit high. Our renewal history, GHC and Dean honored the rate caps agreed to in 2020. Right up until 2023-24, both had honored the rate caps. GHC did not, and GHC offered a 16.2% rate increase in 2023-24. MMSD reached out to, and in partnership with M3, reached out to courts and agreed to offer courts as a dual choice with Dean. And we continue to have GHC partner with courts so that our courts selectors could still see GHC providers. Next slide. For last year, we did not propose an RFP and instead negotiated a renewal of the previous agreement. The 24-25 renewal was the first renewal after the rate caps expired. And you can see the rates that were negotiated for last year, 19.9% for Dean and 15.9% for courts. Those high rates were in response to the artificially low rate caps and also in response to healthcare increased cost for labor and also the effects of COVID. So for 25-26, we're currently estimating that the renewal increases will be similar to last year in those double-digit percentages. We are exploring options to meet budget limitations and we'll present these in early 2025. And if we are directed by the board to pursue a health RFP, we should start that process very soon. The next slide talks about the process for soliciting for bids through the RFP process. We work in partnership with M3 for getting those bids. The last time we went to RFP was 2020. None of the local plans have a sufficient provider network on their own to meet MMSD employee needs. And we have listed some of the carriers who could potentially respond to the RFP. The impact of going to RFP is that it's unclear how the district's current carriers would respond to an RFP and whether the national or statewide carriers would participate. Despite its size, MMSD does not have much leverage with carriers because of its financial performance, which means that our loss, you can go to the next slide, sorry. The loss ratios are greater than 100% and the minimal cost sharing benefit design. Also, switching carriers is disruptive to employees and requires administrative effort to transition and educate employees. There's a lot of communication that goes into that. So other options to explore for 2025-26 is to increase the premium contribution, which could help lower those, any plan design change that we make could potentially lower the renewal rate. We could increase the eligibility criteria. We could pursue an opt-out stipend. We could increase cost sharing and offer high deductible health plan option. For the premium contributions, they were last increased in 2020-21. And as I previously stated, they range from 2.5% to 12%, depending on the employee group. And our handbook does allow up to 10% for each employee group, except for administrators, which are currently at 12%. And for every 1% increase in premium contributions, it would generate approximately $780,000 in cost savings reductions. The next slide. Increasing the, that's the slide. Increasing the premium contributions is effective and immediate cost savings. It spreads increased employee costs across all enrollees, and pre-tax deductions reduce taxable incomes and moves the district closer to other Dane County districts and their premium contribution levels. And just as a recap, M3 has recommended that we negotiate a rate increase based on our current plans, which does not preclude us from making plan design changes and then pursue the feasibility of the RFP for 26-27. Questions?
All right, Board Member Muldrow, then Board Member Vandermeulen.
Yeah, of the three insurance carriers we've worked with, so Dean and GHC and Ports, who is the most expensive?
So currently for our HMO plans, Dean is more expensive than Quartz. We don't have current pricing for GHC since we don't have contracts with them, but Quartz is lower cost, which is where most of our members are.
I think it's relevant to mention the long-term history with all three of these insurance providers, which is that at one time we did work with all three of them and we were just reduced to having two, and we're kind of back to working with all three of them at this point. I want to ask, I think the idea that we're not a good organization to work with because of the cost of insuring our staff, I think undermines our ability to jump by 20% in a year, which not all organizations would be able to do. And so if we are able to absorb the additional cost of insurance and we are willing to pay that amount, when do we have kind of the conversation about the quality of services and getting the best for the people who work for us in terms of healthcare?
We can start those conversations after this meeting.
The other thing about kind of what's driving that expense is I doubt highly that 100% of the people who are insured through the district are costing our insurance companies over $2,000 a month. So can you tell me a little bit about kind of what percentage of staff kind of drive that utilization rate in terms of?
Like me?
Sure, if you know.
The general rule of thumb in health insurance in particular is there's an 80-20 rule. So 80% of individuals enrolled spend 20% of the or incur 20% of the cost, which means 20% of your enrollees spend 80% of 80% of the claims. So there are a number of different factors, including chronic, how many people have chronic diseases, how many high cost claimants you have, which is usually a pretty high threshold of claims. I don't remember off the top what our carriers consider, but usually, over $100,000 in claims, 250,000, those are usually your high cost claimants, but it's definitely not an even distribution of claims across all of people. Does that help?
That does help, but what I'm really curious about is, say, is it kind of 20% of people who are enrolled are, are chronically ill and are leveraging? And like, what does that mean in terms of how we make sure long-term that the people who are most dependent on their healthcare have quality support?
So we can get more detailed data from the carriers in terms of disease categories, like who's healthy versus, I don't know, Bree, if you have anything to add, but I think they can provide us with that spectrum of how many fall into different categories of health. And that is usually driven by their claims costs.
I'd be happy to add comments. I feel bad. I don't want you to feel like you have to say everything. That's why I'm here tonight. So thank you for having me, Bree Hillenbrand from Up3. So we can certainly dig into the data if you ever want to do that. So our team, that is what we do. That is a big part of the conversation of trying to continue to offer the best program, right? We know how important it is to take care of our people here. So they are being taken care of. The hard piece of it is that some of these chronic conditions and some of these major high cost claimants, so cancers, some of the specialty drugs that people are on that are life-changing and life-saving are very expensive, and we can't control any of that. And that's the tough piece. So our people are getting the care they need, but like everywhere else, all of my schools, I have a lot of schools right now that are in the same spot because they're in. It's frustrating because it's hard to control and curb those costs. So when we're talking about these amazing drugs that came out for cystic fibrosis and some other pretty major costs we have here because we have so many people, which is wonderful. We're a big district, but with that comes a lot of high cost claim activity. And specifically on our dean side right now, every time we close one out, there seems to be another large high cost claimant that's taking its place. So our dean population has really seen an uptick. We're still new, believe it or not, for courts. So they're still trying to get a handle on, what we look like and how we're going to run. And so we do have high cost claimants happening there. You'll remember our 3 carrier system where we got rid of courts, right? We made that decision because all of that specialty high cost claimant care was going directly to UW. So courts couldn't keep up and really was raising our rates pretty high because they were getting all of our really high risk people, which we wanted because we need people at UW, right? Getting the care they need, that comes with a price tag. So unfortunately, it's really tough to help manage the cost piece. The care piece, people are getting what they need, but it's that cost piece that you need help with, right? And that's the piece that's just been hard to manage. And because, we, again, we do have a really rich, amazing plan design, and we've had those caps, which has been great, even with that amount of premium, because that does sound high, right? For a family, it's still not enough premium that they're collecting to pay out on the amount of high cost claimants that we have at this time. We're happy to dig into that data with you if you would like to see that.
I think it would be helpful, but the other thing I want to say is, I think if Dean is overall more expensive, and then we're saying, well, people are hitting a more expensive threshold faster because everything is more expensive through that carrier. I think we have to take that into consideration in terms of a factor. The long-term reality is that Dean has always been the most expensive. And it is a little hard for me to say, I want to consider raising the cost of healthcare to the people who work for us, because being an educator means being exposed to like every kind of journal in the world all the time. We're talking about 25,000 kids. I'm like, just like videos of like toddlers, licking the banister as they go up the stairs. Like, that's what we're exposing the people who work for us to. And so to talk about raising the rate of their insurance without talking about the efficiencies within the plan or the expense of the provider themselves, and whether or not it makes more sense economically to go with, Courts, which was our most popular provider when we moved away from them, and GHC, which was our second most popular provider. So to use those two providers instead of Dean, because Dean is the most expensive, feels strange to me. And so I do think we need to explore, if we're spending millions and millions of taxpayer dollars, I think we need to explore our options and ensure the integrity of services for our staff. That's it for my questions. Thank you, Castro.
Board Member Vandermeulen, then Board Member Mosner-Feltham.
Yes, first, I would like to thank MTI and our other partners for their work on the referendum. I hadn't had a chance to personally do that, so I wanted to do that. Now to the topic at hand, I think we need to rephrase a few things to avoid some glaring ableism. Mentioning plan design 4 different times when the people whose plan design and whether or not they get health care are our most marginalized individuals, primarily our disabled individuals, tends to me to sound like that we're willing to sacrifice people immediately. And I kind of worry about that. I really do, on how it's stated. Maybe I'm too strident, that's me. And I understand and I respect people's opinions. But I happen to agree with Ali on the Dean. It has been high since the first year I was on the board. In fact, it's always been high. My question is on plan design. How do we do that with part-time workers? How do we do that with substitutes? Those are my 2. And that's it. That's all I have. But I would like an answer if it's possible.
Can you repeat the first part of your question? We heard the part about substitutes.
That's the question was, how do we handle substitutes and part-time teachers? Do we cover them insurance if they have 19 hours? How do they pay a bigger share? Do they pay a smaller share? How does that work?
The substitute teachers are eligible based on handbook language and the number of days that they pick up assignments. They can also qualify through the Affordable Care Act and are eligible to enroll in our insurance.
Thank you. That was my only question.
Board Member Mosner-Feltham, and then Board Member Simkin.
Thanks, Chair. Congratulations to everybody on the successful referenda. I have a couple of questions, not thinking that now is the time I'll get answers, but since this is like a ongoing conversation. My first question is that you said that our contributions to employee health insurance are about 15% of Fund 10. I would be really curious, what's our goal on that? What's normal? I don't mean normal, like normal correct. I mean, what's ordinary? What's happening in other school districts? I'm especially curious about what's happening in larger school districts in Wisconsin. I know that comparing to Dane County really matters, but I'm curious what's happening in Milwaukee and Green Bay. I'm also really curious about the loss ratios. I'm curious about what our loss ratio, what our use metrics were prior to 2020. And I'm curious about to what extent this, people are really sick because there remains a global pandemic. people are gonna stay getting really sick. And so like, I guess my question there, and not that anyone here can answer that, but like, what's the future of like, of health insurance as a business model when people are just getting sicker and sicker, and like, how do we relate to that? And how do we relate to that if the business model for private insurance carriers is gonna be like, less and less is gonna be available for sick people? Like, what's our, as Madison Metropolitan School District, like, what's our orientation to that? So, and that one's not a question that you can answer, I know that. But that's a question I have for our assembly body. And then I suppose the other question I have is just sort of like, I see you've got here, that there's all these other options. I'm trying to find the exact phrase. The district is exploring options to meet budget limitations and will present details on these options in early 2020 as part of the district budget process. So I would be curious, like, where and when and from whom you're talking about that? Like, what's the process by which we have those conversations as a group? And then I guess my other sort of thing to throw out there is that, like, one of the things that people have come to expect by being employed in a public school or by a city or by a municipality is that, okay, my wages won't match wages in the private sector. I know this going into that, right? Like, but I expect to have generous, comprehensive, affordable health insurance. I expect to have generous sick leave. And so I wonder, and this is, not a question just for you, but this is a question for Dr. Gothard, who I'm sure will watch the recording of this after he gives his speech. Like, what's our vision of what makes it valuable and worth it for people to work in public schools in a context when that may no longer be the case? So like, what else do we say besides the joy and value of working with young people as they go through their lives, which is a real thing, and I understand that, but it's not the only thing. So what do we think makes it worth it for people to work in public schools when these promises of the past, like maybe 50 years, are no longer applicable? And then the other thing I would throw out is, like, when we think about this, do we think at all about like sick leave at all? Like, are there other school districts who are saying, okay, if we obviously not for people who have serious conditions or chronic conditions, but for the 80% of our enrollees, is there a threshold at which an extra sick day every month seriously limits the amount of healthcare they're using? And I said, this is somebody who like pushes myself to the edge and then gets really sick. Like, is that happening other places that we can find out about? Those are my questions and thoughts. And I really appreciate the opening of the conversation so that we can make the right moves here. That's it for me, Chair.
Thank you. Any response, or otherwise we can move on to Board Member Simkin?
We'll certainly work on getting the answers
For sure.
Board Member Simkin?
Okay, thank you. So we are in this interesting space where we did just receive, what we asked for the 2 referendum, and we're still operating in a structural deficit. And so my questions are really just, they're not philosophical, they're totally pragmatic. Like, let's talk about some of the numbers here. So one of the things that I heard you say, Jennifer, is that we have the lowest employee share cost in the area. And I'd like to know, how does our current employee share ratio compare with other districts within our region? So that's my first question. You can stop me if you know the answer, or else I can keep going.
I can speak to it too.
Sure.
Like,
Go ahead.
yeah. So I will say most of the other Dane County districts and even Green Bay, so we work with Green Bay as well, are at least 12 for everybody or higher. So 12 is the starting point, and that really happened after Act 10, where a lot of schools, you know, the Dane County schools and also adopted that 12 or 12%. And that has, I would say, increased based on sometimes wellness participation or whatnot. So just as an example, so Verona is at 11 if you participate in wellness, or it's 15 if you don't. So there are other caveats like that. I was here when we talked about restructuring premium contribution. I remember sitting in Mike Berry's office with Deirdre and talking about, you know, how are other larger districts structuring it. So really a lot of that happened because our model mirrors a bit more of what MTS does. And we really wanted to look at income, right? And attach that to, you know, what people, so that's where that came from originally. And so, but I just wanted to give that history if everyone didn't know that. But then for, you know, the other schools that are around, as well as like even at Green Bay, you know, they're well up, they're at 12 or above that.
Okay, so I'm not sure from the comments I've heard so far, if the rest of the board is interested in this. I would be interested in seeing a real comparison. Because you're talking about starting at 12, which is sort of our ending point, and we don't have a range. I would also like to see a comparison of the types of what's the word I'm looking for, plans that are being offered, if our plans are comparable to other districts or far more generous as well. And I think it would help to have all of that in front of us. I'm also wondering, and this is kind of a historical question, why are we not currently offering one option that's a acceptable plan?
Would you like me to speak to that?
Yeah.
I've been here a long time, which I'm very happy about. So thank you. I really enjoy working with all of you. So that is something that we have talked about for a number of years. And again, the goal has always been to preserve our benefits for as long as possible. And specifically, so I will speak to what I have seen in other districts and why, for two reasons, we haven't offered it here, because if we are going to offer a high deductible option specifically with like a vehicle, if we're going to attach an HSA to it, like a health savings account, we were trying to figure out how we would budget for that and what amount, right? But a bigger reason is there've been a lot of conversations around, we never want to discourage people from seeking care. And so now if you are on that higher deductible, the concern was that, you know, people may have a cash flow issue. It may be an issue, you know, it may not work for everybody. So it has been talked about for a number of years. And I think the last conversations around it were to think about maybe surveying, educating, and talking with the population to see if there would be interest in that. So there may be some individuals that, you know, that might be an option. People that aren't utilizing as much of the insurance, you know, maybe some of our younger work staff that would like to see a little bit more in their paycheck, you know, that would be willing to take on more risk if they were in that high deductible health plan. So that has, you know, I feel like that conversation has been happening, just haven't actually, you know, implemented that yet.
I'm wondering, because I was also thinking about those very young people who think that they don't need to go to the doctor anyway. And there's not necessarily a huge number in our district. I guess I don't know how many people would fit into that category. Do we have any idea of what the uptake generally would be if that was offered along with something as generous as the plan that we're already offering? And what kind of savings there could be?
Sorry.
So I would just say a lot of it depends on what the difference is between premiums, you know, and there's some actuaries would have to weigh in on that. You don't want it to be such a dramatic difference between the two that all of your healthy people go into one plan and all of your not healthy people go into another. So there's some balancing there. What we do know, what data shows kind of across the country is high deductible health plans tend to be more popular with higher income earners. And people that want to maximize that health savings account because it's, you know, a tax deductible contribution. They want to leverage the employer contribution to it. We also know that high deductible health plans are very popular in the private sector. I've seen numbers as high as over 50% of workers in the private sector are in a high deductible health plan. In the private sector, the participation rate is much lower than that. And it's also offered as a dual choice. So you can pick and choose, you know, a more traditional plan or a high deductible health plan. And so that's why it tends to attract people that understand what the benefit is and are most interested in leveraging it. But I would say that based on the state, which is where I came from, it took a number of years for enrollment in their high deductible health plan to get to any kind of significant number. And I don't believe it ever got above, 15%.
And it really is contingent on what you're able to fund, into that HSA account. That's more of the attraction of why people would want to head in that direction, because they would otherwise say, well, why do I want to do this necessarily if I'm not going to have the help with to offset the high deductibles? So the schools that we've seen, because there are a lot of schools, even some schools in Dane County that have moved to this, it's been a pretty big contribution into that HSA to offset the change that people are experiencing to move from, a traditional plan to that high deductible health plan. Because now everything's going to the deductible and you don't have the co-payments anymore, especially in that drug piece. And that's something too that, comes with a lot of education, and, is riskier for people.
So one of the things that I heard you say and then kept going on was that we have to be careful about that ratio of people who are really utilizing insurance and people who are not. Because we've been hovering around 100%, the 100% mark, does it actually feel like a viable option to even look into it at this point?
I think we'd have to explore it with the plans and get their expertise, as well as M3's actuaries. They do have an actuarial team that can help us understand what that would look like. But yes, it is, there has to be a premium savings in order to encourage them to enroll in a high deductible health plan. And as Bree said, that contribution amount to the HSA will make a significant impact.
Right, but I guess the part that I was asking was if it would then drive up the rates for everybody in the other plans. If we took the healthiest people out of our plan and
I would say that's always a risk.
It is, it's tough to measure the adverse selection, but we would have to monitor how many people actually make that move. And this is already happening right now because we have Quartz and Dean. So Dean is so much higher. We've been with Dean for a long time. Dean started, out higher, as we talked about, but there's adverse selection too. That's a smaller population at Dean. And right now we have some pretty high cost claimants at Dean. And if you don't have a big enough risk pool, right, to offset some of those costs based on the premium that you're being in, that's where already you see kind of an uneven adverse selection situation going on just with our two carriers, because we have 70% of, our people with CGHC with Quartz, and then 30% with Dean. It's similar to this plan design conversation where we would have to monitor that over time to see if that is now raising the rates on our traditional plan because our higher risk individuals are on our traditional plan, and how many people would jump to that high deductible health plan. That would be a study that we would have to pay attention to for several years to see what that impact is. And of course, we'd be reporting back on that and then making recommendations of, adjustments we'd have to make because of that. So it's hard to predict that on the front end. We would have to watch and, see if we implement that option, where that goes.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering my questions. This is one of the hardest conversations I think we have every year because of, the the desire to take care of everyone who's here. And state of insurance in our country. So, thank you.
Okay, Board Member Muldrow.
Yeah, there's two things. One, I just want to caution us in this conversation. In terms of like what makes somebody medically expensive is not necessarily them being unhealthy, right? Like you can be a perfectly healthy person who is pregnant and that becomes expensive. Or you can be a perfectly healthy person who's having gender affirming care and that is expensive. So the difference between like expensive healthcare and healthy, I want to tease those out thoughtfully. And the other thing I want to say is we've talked about vacancies a lot, right? And kind of cost savings related to vacancies. And a lot of times I think we think about salary, right? If the average employee takes home, about 85 or about $75,000 a year, and then you add $24,000 healthcare, that's a pretty significant thing to think about. When we are understaffed or when we have significant vacancies in our schools, is there any relationship between that and people's health and well-being, right? Do we see at our schools where our educators are using all of their, break time or planning time to sub for vacancies, that people are more likely to get ill or people are more likely to take off? Like, is there kind of a cost that we are not factoring in? And I think it's relevant to take into consideration in terms of what is kind of creating the trends in relationship to the environment we create for our staff and the impact it has on their health. That's it for my comments. Thank you, Chair Castro.
Thank you. Thought it'd be in the best interest for us to go to RFP for for healthcare. Sorry, it says my internet is unstable. Can you hear me?
You froze there, Savion. You want to start that statement over?
Yeah, so a key decision point for us tonight was deciding if we as a board thought it to be in the best interest to go to RFP for healthcare. My position is no. I think that we have to prioritize stability for our employees right now and to keep our plan as competitive as possible relative to other districts and other employers just generally in the area. So if we don't mind, do we mind going around and just voicing whether we think we should do this or not? And I'll start with Board Member Muldrow.
Yes, I think we should go to RFP. I think we're obligated to kind of size up competitive rates. I think stability is compromised by the fact that our partnership with GHC in courts is coming to a close. I think we need to re-examine. I also think we have to factor in, kind of cost as a reality of how we make this decision.
Okay, Board Member Vandermeulen.
Very simply, since I'm against plan design changes, I think we have no choice but to go to RFP on that and to look for a lower cost option.
Board Member Mosner-Feltham.
I'm not sure yet.
Okay. Board Member Pearson.
I mean, I think board members tonight gave some really great comments and also looks like some homework and response to what we would like to see. As far as this decision that we need to make, what is like the timeline right now? So like if we do not come out of this with unanimous or consensus around where we want to go, how does this affect the timeline?
We'd really like to know next month. We want to get prepared to do the RFP. So we, have all the documentation we need and, we would, yeah, just so we can stay on track and have enough time, obviously, for all of you to evaluate. Next month would really be kind of the decision to go to.
So we would have to make the official decisions probably by the end of this month at this regular board meeting. So tonight is just giving you guys permission to go to RFP. So if we give you permission to go out to RFP, how long does that usually take for you all to get it? For us then to make a final decision? Are we thinking like January?
Yes, so because of your size, that is helpful. We would get everything put together. We would get the RFP sent out in December. And then we would expect answers in January. You can obviously push it along as quickly as possible, but we would want that amount of time when we think about if we would make a change, we need to do education, you know, with staff. And you need enough time to make those decisions. So we have to get all that done before everyone leaves for the summer.
Okay, so I will say then I am in favor of doing the feasibility RFP. Mostly because our insurance is due to expire in a couple years. And so that we could, depending on however we decide to move, there is some continuity for staff. And that we're not waiting until the year of or the year right prior, or we're deciding, making these decisions very quickly, like we had to pivot last time we were making these decisions. I would hate to have to do that again. There's a lot of stress on our staff, and it was pretty stressful being the decision makers in that too as well. So I'm for going for RFP to at least see where we can go.
And Board Member Simpkin?
I believe that we should move forward with RFP. Just because of the situation that unfolded last year. And we don't know, as Board Member Pearson said, what's gonna happen when our agreements expire. I think we need to have as much data as we can to be good stewards of this that we have.
All right, we will have an official motion ready for us by the end of the month board meeting.
And then we'll work with, on our side, I'll work with Jennifer and her team to kind of think about some of the questions that came up, some of the data reports, and get in a weekly update, if not this week, then next week, depending on how much and how fast they can get the information. And then that way you can have the information before the board meeting to be able to review it and ask questions, and then be able to vote at the end of the month.
That's great.
All right, moving on to 25-26 budget development.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I know, nobody likes. I know, but it's helpful.
Definitely.
Yes.
All right. We'll talk a little bit about the timeline, the next slide. There should be no shock to anybody or surprise. We are in the first few months. 25, 26, what an exciting time.
I forgot to say congratulations.
So we're just gonna kind of get into laying the framework of 25, 26. But between now and January, we'll do really more of the presenting, taking a look at what's going on. And then as we get into the spring of 25, right, the state legislature will go into session. They'll be debating whether and how much state aids they will provide for the 25-26 school year and the 26-27 school year. So we don't know what that will be. If they don't figure it out, we assume that it'll be the same budget that exists this year is how state law works. But our goal will then to start bringing some pretty significant proposals, changes in the spring of 25, and you know, as we approach the May and June operations work group for the full June meeting on the preliminary 25-26 program. So that's the time. As always, the next slide, Jesse. It always begins with taking a look at revenues, and we won't know revenues because they're based on third Friday, September counts, really the driving force for our revenue limits. And as I said, we won't really know what the legislature has in mind regarding any changes to the revenue limit law. But I'll start, I have been taking a look at it, and our first real work, go to the next slide, Jesse, is kind of coming up with the projections that we want to do for enrollment for 25-26. So I've updated the table to have the 2024 October counts that we have reported to the state for our revenue calculation. And so the new column is the green one on the right, the change 24 to 23. Go to the end, it's 120 FTE increase compared to last year in terms of the counts we use for that 3-year rolling average in terms of revenue limits. So it'll become, as we look at enrollments this year, start getting that 20-year enrollment projection, spend a little bit more time with our individual attendance areas and looking at the schools, trying to do some forecasting for 25-26. Likely would run a couple of different scenarios, right? No change. I don't see anything that would predict that we would actually lose students, but we can talk about kind of the different ranges that I'd start plugging into our models as we get into early 2025. So the next slide is, I decided to take a little bit longer look at our 3-year rolling average in terms of our membership. We have been just kind of looking at the last 5 years, and the last 5 years show us maxing out at 27,500 for a period of time, and then declining revenue limits in terms of the 3-year rolling average to this year at 24-25, where you see 23-24 on this chart and 24-25, a little bit of leveling out and going up. But I think I wanted to give us a little bit more of a perspective on this, right? Particularly coming off the successful referendums, and there was talk about, well, why aren't you doing something different with your, right? If you go back 12 years to 11-12, right? Our 3-year rolling average back in 11-12 was 25,786, right? Less than our current 26,204. So in terms of our physical footprint in school buildings that we use, we're actually higher now than we were 12 years ago. There was a decline, right? We did peak in those years that the graph shows, but overall, our enrollments are higher than they were 12 years ago today, right? So in terms of our costs, in terms of our physical space and our need, it's really, as we were telling the public the last couple of months, we really have always been a district of at least 25,000, right? There's been some ups and some downs, but in terms of the needs we have for students and families, it's pretty consistent in terms of where we are at. So I just wanted to add a little bit of a different perspective. Next slide makes me most happy in terms of revenues. So you'll see, based on a successful operating referendum for 24-25, the orange line, which is our total revenue limit as a percentage change, has gone above the blue CPI line. Now, we still have places to make up in terms of sustainable revenues. The last few years, that remember that a little over $30 million is what we're down compared to CPI just over the last 2 years. And we talked about, we're still in a structural deficit, even with the passage of the referendum. We still intend to use a little short of $23 million to end this year. But very positive in terms of the support to increase our sustainable revenues. Now, again, our hope is that the state will provide more dollars for aids. This is just authority. This doesn't mean we need to use it. We'll only use what we need as we kind of build back that sustainable revenue base. But it's positive news. Okay, then I'm excited in the world of school finance to actually be able to put a very confident 25-26 state aid projection in terms of next year. And that's only because our revenues, our state aids for this year, general school aids, at that historic high that we talked about, $61.3 million. which really allowed a very small tax bill increase compared to last year. And it really was that significant increase in our state. State law has a provision that's called the hold harmless, where it says you get 85% next school year of the amount that we certified. So because we had 61.3 million in certified dollars, we know unless the legislature changes the law, and they can change the law, we should be getting $52.1 million, which is significantly higher than we've gotten over the last several years, right? So that's a positive thing for our taxpayers, right? Because under revenue limits, as your aid is higher, tax impact is low. Speaking of revenue limits, when we were talking at senior executive leadership, I asked me if I could kind of put a little different perspective, a little bit more about this revenue, right? And what it means and how we look at this. So our revenue limit is the max on the bar. So if you look at 24-25, that number in total is $424.7 million with the $30 million that was approved at referendum, compared to the year before, the 385.1 million in terms of total for 23-24. But what you can really see here is that larger orange part is the state aid. The rest of it is property taxes under the district's revenue limit calculation, right? So as that state aid gets higher, it drives down the blue coloring on our revenue. Now, overall, not significantly, but historically, we're about 90% property tax, 10% state aids when it comes to revenue limits. In 24-25, it's not a lot, but it shifts it to us 85% property tax funded to 15% in terms of state aid, right? So as the legislature provides more aid, it doesn't increase our revenue limit picture, but it drives down the controlled levy, the property tax impacts, right? And so that's what we're hoping for, a little bit more of a balance from the state when it comes to how that revenue limit is funded, state aids compared to property taxes. But it's positive. It's positive for our tax. All right, now I want to round out a little bit next two slides on 24-25. This is the graphical display of the budget that was adopted with passage of the referendum in terms of total ongoing revenues. You can see 486.4 is a decrease from the year before. Expenditures are up some. But it really is showing the need for $22.4 million in one-time revenues to have a balanced budget in 24-25, right? So has been our plan is over a period of years, we intended and we're now given permission from the community to rebuild that sustainable revenue base in terms of moving forward. All right, now the slide that nobody likes, particularly Dr. McCray, but you know, it's really good stuff. This is my favorite slide. But this is just a recap. I'll draw your to the middle of the slide where it says the property tax impact on the average home, just a $40.50 projected increase over the prior year. So a home valued at $457,300 with the passage of the referendum, tax bill increasing projected to be $40.50. And I just want to spend a little bit of time on that school levy tax credit, which is the bottom, and give you the summary takeaway points. The $85 million projected for the school levy tax credit is over a 20% impact on our school levy amount, if that money would be shown on the front end. What that really means is on the average home, it's a $900 less what you end up paying on the average tax bill, right? So we say your taxes are gonna go up $40.50, but the actual bill that the average homeowner is gonna pay is gonna decrease $22.35, right? It's because that school levy tax credit, that $85 million is paid by the state. Even though we have to tell folks it's property taxes, the state buys that property tax down, so you ultimately do not end up paying it. District total $85 million, right? So it's a significant amount of money, and we're gonna continue to talk about it and how it impacts our budget and really the projected net impact to the property taxpayer. So we're gonna leave 24, 25 now. I'm just gonna take a little bit of a pause, see if there's any questions. Been talking about the 24, 25 budget for, good 9 months now.
Yeah, board member Vandermeulen.
I'm going to be nice to Bob and say congrats on the passing of the referendum. I do, for once, do not have any questions on this issue.
Yeah, it was definitely a team effort, for sure. We all were in on it. It was a huge success. And I haven't found anyone that has a higher pass percentage than Madison Metropolitan School District. I've been trying, I'm looking for it, none exists. Statewide.
Well, how about that? Bob, I think you can continue.
Okay, so I'm gonna get into the 25, 26. Again, this is just the beginning of it. As always, our budget is a matter of priorities, and our priorities are set by our three strategic goals. We talk about at the beginning of every meeting in terms of making sure our scholars are on track to graduate college, career, and community. That our schools are safe places, where every child can thrive, and that, we're doing something about closing the opportunity gaps for African American children and allow them to excel in school and life after school, right? So that's our focus. Tying it back to the district improvement plan, which you've been talking about also the last few months. I just restated it there to kind of keep us focused. Our goals will look at, and our focus. How are we closing the opportunity gaps? These are the goals we have as a district, which then inform school improvement plans, which will then also inform our central office departments in terms of how we look forward, right? But the strategic goals, we will use our equity tools that have been honed and fine-tuned over the last few years, which are linked in the presentation that was provided to you in terms of both the equity tool and the guidance tool. But if you go to the next slide, Jesse, which is where our budget vision is, which is the same vision that we had last year. Our goals are the same. But it's really taking a look at in terms of where we're invested in terms of the priorities to address the racial, linguistic and socioeconomic inequities. And really investing in our facilities, which we were able to do now, the successful referendum. And alignment of our resources to continue to retain our high quality staff and attract new staff. Always looking at a more equitable distribution, and we spent 24, 25 budget talking about the need to start allocating more resources to our schools where the gaps are the biggest, and there's a large need in terms of communities and the families the school buildings are serving. We shifted that way in terms of our Title I allocations, in terms of community schools and village builders as part of the 24, 25 budget. So we'll want to continue to look at those areas in terms of our vision. The next slide talks about the budget goals again, which are the same focus as our vision, and will continue to do, which we talked about in the months leading up to the referendum in terms of our focus of our resources and the continued investment, commitment to excellence that the board has shown in terms of early literacy, continuing to do 4K, 4-year-old kindergarten, and again, obviously retaining our high quality staff and then recruiting to continue to keep our high quality staff. So that's really the 25, 26 budget goals. As I said, the biggest really is we're at the whims of the legislature in finding some of the factors that are going to impact our operating dollars. But we're really, from my perspective, working on the enrollment projections and what we're comfortable with. So we'll continue to monitor that and provide more information as we roll on into January and early 2025. But any questions, Chair Castro, I turn it back to you.
Thank you. Board member Muldrow.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. I think it's nice to get to recognize the enthusiasm and support our community has for public education and funding public education appropriately. I think when we talk about kind of our strategic goals, making sure our entire community hears themselves in those goals and also has a firm understanding of kind of the outcomes related to those goals and investments related to those goals and the effectiveness of those goals, as well as the ability to prioritize the achievement and learning of all students. And so I'm curious about kind of how we're taking this moment to address inefficiencies or things that are ineffective strategies. And how we're increasing investment in things that are highly effective, and how our 2025-2026 budget will reflect both a departure or moving away from things that do not work or that have not yielded the kinds of results that our young people need, and a reorientation towards things that produce better outcomes. And I know that that's an instructionally informed question, but I do think they have to speak to each other in our budget. Is there any process that we'll engage in terms of identifying our inefficiencies?
Yeah.
It's effective, what is it?
Dr. Gothard has talked often, particularly in the months leading up to the referendum, about the need for us to visit our strategic goals and our priorities and to do just that. Look at where we're spending our money now and where are we getting payback for those dollars and where we should continue to invest. So that's clearly gonna be, I would say, a major change in the last couple of years we've done at the district in terms of really taking a look at all of our different areas. So that's definitely part of the plan. And we'll be bringing that information back to the board in terms of both instruction work group and operations work.
I greatly appreciate that. And a note I'd like to add to that response is that I think we have embraced certain approaches that were really necessary in relationship to the pandemic and in terms of recovering from kind of this extended period of virtual learning. And I do think we may want to really reflect on how effective those approaches have been and whether or not we kind of need to adjust some of that work. That's it for my questions, Chair Castro.
Thank you. Board Member Moser Feltham.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Bob. I think my question is a little bit in the same line as Board Member Muldrow. And I would love to see the 2025, well, yeah, I would love to see the 2025-26 budget timeline on the same side as the strategic planning timeline. That would make, I think that would help me feel like I'm putting those pieces together a little bit more clearly. Because I share Board Member Muldrow's sort of like, okay, like we're gonna have this great budget, but like what's gonna be in it, and is it how are we making sure that it's matched to the stuff that we know that we need to do around stop, start, and sustain what's next for our students. So that is something I would love to see in the future. And that's it for me.
Thank you. Board Member Vandermeulen.
Yes, I'm glad that we have the percentages of how we want our reading and math proficiency. I found that really helpful to have those included on the slide with it, both in numbers and visually. I think that helps. Additionally, I like the 10 and 15%. I think that's excellent. The only thing I would ask is we also increase our special ed performance to be at least 10% as well. But we can discuss that at another time. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for all your work.
Thank you. Any other board member comments or questions? Okay, thank you. I appreciate this forecasting for us as a body, the administration, and the community. Okay, moving on to our last item, a facilities update.
Scott? Yeah.
Okay, so obviously 2024 referendum has passed. So we have a lot of work to do. In addition to referendum work, we also have a lot of facility updates and maintenance to do as well as ongoing performance. So we'll kind of drop into 2024 referendum.
Great, so the next slide, thank you.
our lovely timeline. So you can see we're past the November 5th ballot vote, yay. And the work is now beginning. So in January, we will have a construction management RFP recommendation come to the board, along with an abatement RFP recommendation. Those processes are already being engaged in. We've been working with our owners rep, the Concord Group, to get the construction management RFP ready to roll and out there and in the field to start getting some bids. As we go through, we will continue to be doing ongoing community engagement, and that'll start focusing in on our sites that we have noted in our referendum planning facilities question. Slide. So the big things that remain, 2 sites per year, shovel in the ground in spring of 2026. And as we had said, the first location is Shabazz and Sherman. And the second location that we've added is Blackhawk and Gophers. Next slide. Scott?
Okay, so few definitions that we'd like to cover, referendum 24 roles and responsibilities and why. So as you can see, the Board of Education members, we call them the role of, doing the policy making for our body group. So making sure we're following the practices and processes that refine who we are. The referendum 2024 planning team, it's the project advisory team. So it's a lot of the senior executive leadership team that we'll be meeting on a regular basis to make sure we meet the ultimate scope of our project, to make sure we're defining our goals and hitting our tasks. Building services, what we call as our project sponsor. It's basically my group. Reviewing all the project decisions and then ultimately having the final sign-offs based upon input from our senior advisory teams, and also decisions that have to be made at the project level. The owners rep, who have been on board now for about a month, they are the project managers. They represent the interests of us, worked on behalf of us, and make sure the project is on budget and on time. And they also are the ones that will bring issues to the table and help us solve them with recommendations that they see or expertise that they bring. Architectural engineering, again, they are the architects and the engineers responsible for designing a sustainable design in our buildings that also meets the needs of our children's and our community. And they work with the owners rep, and coming on board in January will be the construction managers of the project. That group is the OPN architects. They're actually located downtown here. And then the construction management, we call the CMs. Those folks are the responsible ones to build and actually do the construction of our sites or renovations that be. And they're also working directly with our owners rep and our architects as well. But again, to be determined in 2025, that RFP is out. We've had a couple downloads already, and we'll make those internal recommendations and interview process starting November, early December. That's how we are in their steps. So a little talk about our owners rep, the Concord Group. Some of you may know who they are, but we thought we'd share. They ensure our project incorporates our school community needs. They're making sure that we hit spaces that are future ready for max learning, spaces accessible for community engagement and the pride of our community, spaces that are sustainable and neutral to our environment, engage school community throughout the project. So they're ones helping with our community input sessions. They also have the expertise of in-depth design and construction reviews, stuff that we don't have internally. And they allow us as Madison Metropolitan School District to focus on our existing building projects and maintenance to upkeep our building systems functioning for our students and staff of non-referendum buildings. It allows us to do what we need to do, maintaining our buildings in addition to referendum. So like I said, they came on about a month ago. They also have helped, in the meantime, they've helped us support and develop the RFPs for the construction managers. They helped us interview and select our architectural engineers, OPN. And they built out for us the comprehensive CM RFP that is now out. They're the ones creating a very extensive timeline and financial spend tracking sheets. We have a very high level detail project schedule and project timing for finances as well. Those key stakeholders for your information, Kevin McGinty is our project executive. He's the guy directly main point of contact. Patrick is the director. Michael is a specialization in educational planning and programming. Mark Johnson is our senior project manager. So those are 4 key folks that we work with. All have specialization in that project. They work with us on a weekly and daily basis. Our architectural engineering firm, OPN Architects, those main tasks are tracking timelines and engaging in comprehensive design. They also be involved in our community input sessions, understanding the community who we live in. And also some of their architects are in the Toki Orchard Ridge area. So they're also very valuable and really want the input for their children to provide a good space. They'll be providing a QR code throughout our project so we can share that QR code and you can see where we are in the design aspect from OPN standpoint. And key stakeholders, Wes Reynolds here is principal in charge. He's located here in Broome Street. Susan Bauer-Sox is our main point of contact, and they have a very high level specialist in K-12 planning and design. It's Vicki Highland. She's really highly accredited in their opinion. So what to expect coming forward? Part of this is revisiting the long range planning for recommendations going forward. That'll be January 25. So in addition to the referendum work, we also have to get back to maintaining our buildings and other standards in our buildings. We'll start having community engagement sessions to inform our new spaces at our 10 school sites. Those will be starting somewhere right around January from the external community. Internal communities, what I talk about for the school side and our Doyle side, will be starting here in November and December. Monthly project updates will be coming to the Board of Education as far as design, where we are, the budget, and the timeline. An evaluation of critical needs of non-referendum schools. So we're going back into prioritization of our critical needs, all of our non-referendum sites, including the long-range facility plan and the 10-year capital improvement. A slide I like to share is there's a lot of work beyond the referendum school. Okay. We have 35 sites that have not been touched recently or renovated. In the last several years, we've spent $25 million of custodial help and support, $12 million of facility maintenance, $8 million capital maintenance, which is about $880,000 on average per school. We have on average 340 work orders that come through services every week to fix things from lights to the outside grounds to roofs issues to windows and et cetera, things that can happen on a daily basis. And we have 30 tradespeople to keep up. So you can see from that, we have a lot of work we do on a normal basis, in addition to the referendum work. It's very important we have those high level folks like the owners rep and those coming on board so they can manage the high level referendum so we can focus on the day-to-day of our schools, keep them from getting conditions that it can happen. Any questions?
Okay, I see Board Member Vandermeulen, then Board Member Pearson, then Board Member Muldrow.
Sure.
I forgot to take my hand out. Sorry. No questions.
Okay, Board Member Pearson, then Board Member Muldrow.
Yeah, so thank you for the non-referendum schools update part of just like how much it takes for us to keep our schools from falling apart, even though they're falling apart, right? And so my question is just about like, what are the possibilities? Bob, you're gonna not what are the possibilities? Because we do like have schools that were not included in our referendum, and you guys know that previously I am very serious about the heating and cooling in some of our schools. And so what would it look like, and again, the possibilities of some of those schools that really need some of the work so that it can be done in a way that the management is less on our staff because we are doing a little bit of updating here and there. So it's not necessarily tied to the referendum per se, but a possibility of us doing some work that allows us to kind of not have, our staff putting in all that time.
Yeah, there's a couple folds to that.
Yeah.
One is there are ongoing maintenance challenges to get the classrooms under control, especially this time of year when we get these changes of seasons on a daily or an hourly basis at times. So we put a lot of focus to our updating our custodial staff, how to make changes in the classroom faster
Mhm.
while they're waiting for mechanical help. So we've kicked off a really good training program for our custodial staff and kind of get them first line to adjust, right? Because there are some sensors, or I would say room controls, that need to be changed.
Mhm.
So getting them that change so we don't have those long-term effects. On the second side of it is with the referendum passing, we're gonna put a lot of effort to a project group that'll be focusing on specifically HVAC, or what I call room controls, to make sure that we're not having the huge swings of fluctuations that we're having. Some of it's steam traps, some of it's controls for the rooms, to kind of get back a little bit from, I would say, the decay over time, to get them back where they're operating at maybe 10 years ago, right? So it's still maybe a little uncomfortable, but it's not, you're walking into a free sauna, right?
Yeah.
So those are things that we're working on currently to get some of those back under control. And we are spending Fund 46 funds and stuff like that to get back to some of that, so without the large scale HVAC.
Okay.
So that's
without, like
part of-
doing, like the.
Yeah, there are things we can work on the maintenance side, and we're putting the initiative back to what that effort is. So we're doing that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that.
Question?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of answers my question, yeah. And then I guess the cost of it, but, I'm sure Bob is.
Some of it will fall in our normal operating maintenance budgets. There will be a few things that will have to come capitalized, knowing that it may be a short-term capital, but ductwork and lots of stuff like that takes a considerable
Right.
downtime out of the equations of things. You're running into abatement issues in some of our older schools, but getting to the actual operational piece of it to get more tighter controls is possible. That's what we're working.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, wait, I just have one last question. Sorry, I was just digesting what he was saying. Or actually just a comment. I think, and I think I made this comment before, with our previous was that if we can make sure that whatever referendum projects come to us in our consent agenda, however we decide to put that in there for us to approve to get things done, can you just like attach, like, this is attached to like the 2024 referendum? So like, it's a lot more clearer than being in the actual narrative, that it's like, boom, we can see that this is something that is part of the referendum. Cause I know previously we would get things that are consent agenda randomly, or a lot of things all at once, and we really couldn't see where the connection between all the pieces were.
Sure.
So having something that is a little more, connective for us to know where that lies, especially outside of if we're having 340 average work orders come in a week. Something that is like separating those, so that we kind of understand and know we're approving, so,
Yep, we'll put relation to topic, and then we'll put that.
yeah, thank you.
Of course.
All right, thank you. Board Member Muldrow.
Thank you so much, Chair Castro, or Vice President Pearson. I really appreciate your questions and your last comment. I want to talk about our utilization of fund balance to cover costs related specifically to the facilities referendum. And Bob, I know you spoke to part of how we would alleviate the burden on taxpayers is by spending down parts of our fund balance over the course of the next year. My hope is that we're balancing that between the two passing referendums, in part because the operating referendum really does represent recurring costs to the district. And the facilities referendum is more one-time investments in improvements to our facilities. And so can either of you speak to kind of leveraging the fund balance we have beyond our policy in order to offset the cost to taxpayers?
Yeah, I'll get that. Scott and I have begun talking about just that, starting to cost out the backlog of except school by school, put a prioritization on those. started about 6 months ago, having a conversation with building services. Really, our focus is gonna be our roofs. We need some roofs, so we've gotta put some significant dollars in, millions of dollars in some of our individual roofs. So that'll be already in our focus. And then, as I told Scott, once we get the costs, then I'll spend the next few months figuring out the revenue side. Some of that's fund balance. Some of that is our, some of the projects of the schools that have been impacted by the 2020 referendum, where we've clearing out all the remaining invoices. We're probably gonna generate a few $1 million that we can still put towards those projects of the schools that were covered by 2020. And then any other budgeted savings higher than actual expenditures, interest earnings in terms of, the monies that we sold in terms of the bonds for 2020 have to go one of two things. We either buy down the levy next fall, which will then free up levy that we could levy for facilities projects, or put that money toward projects that were part of the 2020. So there's a multitude of ways we can find the revenues, but first is legitimate costs and then priority. And obviously, the buildings that were impacted by 2020, it's gonna be our priority to make sure the roofs are solid, and then we go from there, which we do have a list. Building services does have a pretty extensive list, priority projects in terms of mechanicals and failures and what needs to be attended to, but Scott's using his expertise and reviewing those lists to make sure they're still what we think they should be.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about cost and quality as it relates to materials we use to build schools and renovate schools. I went to Emerson Elementary School, and Emerson Elementary School is carved in marble. It is a school that is not necessarily going anywhere. And we have a few of those kinds of buildings in this district where the quality of the materials used to create those buildings or those structures, the long-term integrity of the building means that it has lasted for over 100 years. I think there's a balancing act between what is cheap up front and will be expensive to fix later. And I want to talk about how we're going to factor that in to this investment.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one of the things that we've really challenged the OR when we talked to them initially is setting the path, right? Then we brought our AEs in. Part of the reasons that we selected the group that we selected was because they talked about sustainable, long-term use of materials in our buildings. Not a 20-year investment, it's gonna last 70 years. Our goal is 60, we're asking beyond it. Because we know it's a long time to come back and build spaces that we have. So we've picked those folks for those longevity materials, easy access to update and do things with, so you can build a beautiful building, but if you encapsulate everything, you're tearing it apart to change the things that would wear out the most. So looking at really good open design to make sure you can access anything you need to, it wears over time, and then identifying those non-sustainable reviews is a big key aspect of these design builds, not just for an energy standpoint, but materials and then accessibility for maintenance. This is the biggest, largest piece typically in a new build is that kills you over time. So having the accessibility, get things quickly, easily accessible, renewable, and things aren't going to go obsolete and adaptable for change over time. That's a big part of our project.
And when you say we're aiming for 70 years, I just want to make sure I understand what you mean by that. Because I think like in some of our buildings, we're actually seeing that lifespan right now of like this building was built in the 60s and now we need to tear it down. And so when you say we're aiming for 70 years, are you saying 70 years from now, these buildings would need to be replaced in their entirety? Are you saying they normalized upkeep and maintenance and?
They would need higher level of renovation.
Okay.
Meaning they'd be, obsolete of the mechanical systems will start to fail. Plumbing, our plumbing in our buildings have been somewhat replaced, but in some of the schools, they've been patchworked. So those are like the longevity pieces of the very high mechanical sides. The building structure themselves, 100 years, right? They'll last a long time. It's just a matter of the guts inside.
Okay, I really appreciate that clarification. We've talked a lot about the position that is the sustainability manager. My first question is, has that person been hired? My second question, so no, we do not have.
It is posted. We've only gotten applications.
Okay, well, I want to urge people to apply.
And we've done some efforts, as of this morning, our group We've gotten Sustained Day to help us advertise. We've got what
Sustained Day.
UW Whitewater, UW Madison. We blasted that out today.
I would recommend sending it to the Wisconsin Economic Development Corp. Just because they have sustainability. Sorry.
No, thank you. Like, I would like to see somebody in that role, and I appreciate all ideas to help us
Absolutely.
get someone in that role, because I believe that that role really needs to inform these projects and our approach to these projects and align this work with the board's goal to be sustainable, renewable, and not damaging to the environment in the immediate next 10 to 15 years or 10 to 20 years.
If I can add to that, our architects written the standard on sustainability buildings in Wisconsin. They are the creators and the masters of that process for the state of Wisconsin.
Well, I love to hear that about OPN. It's nice to know that about them. It would be great in the long run to really understand how the board's commitment to sustainability and to the environment is going to be evident in these investments. And so I hope that that is coming to us. The last note I have is really a comment, and it aligns with what Vice President Pearson was speaking to, which is as we kind of flush out these projects and the scope of work, I think it's really important to distinguish the money that we are putting back into our economy through employment opportunities for our greater community. And so understanding how many employees it takes to execute a referendum of this scale and that investment back into our community is something I hope we're updating our community on, that we are employing thousands of people to do this work. I want to thank you all for prioritizing Sherman and Shabazz, following through with what we said years ago. I think that the Shabazz community will be so tremendously excited and felt a little left out of the last round. And I also really appreciate that Black Hawk Gompers are included, because I think it's this opportunity to work on 4 schools, but 2 buildings. And I think there's a need over and over again to orientate our community to the fact that we are 52 schools and sites, but we're not actually 52 school buildings. And kind of, you know, as we're renovating and we're talking about has and has not received renovation, to really be nuanced in the nature of our buildings, the scope of our work. That's it for me. Thank you, Chair Castro.
Thank you so much. Board Member Mosner Feltham.
Thank you, Chair. So half of my questions, board member. No, don't be sorry.
We're all
It makes me
thinking-
feel really good. But I'm like, oh, I thought of that too. You always say it so well too. I sort of like board member Moja's question. I started to get like a little bit nervous about the furnishings in there. I'm thinking about, okay, when West was renovated, we had these little desks, these horrible little desks that were horrible. And old, and we threw all of them away. And that's fine, but like, are we gonna throw everything away in all these schools? And like, I would love to hear going forward, like lots of examples of how that's not gonna happen. That doesn't have to be today. And then when we replace the furnishings in the schools, are we gonna replace all these like horrible wooden objects with plastic objects that are gonna break right away? I mean, I was in a classroom where we had funding to get new furniture, like flexible seating, we're gonna do all this group stuff, and it was just like not any good. Like, I don't know, a bunch of 9th graders just like using it, just real, like, I sort of feel worried about that. And we'll look forward to hearing lots of examples of how that's not what's gonna happen. I also wanna, I don't know if I said this to you, I said this to other people. I think about like, okay, we're gonna get lots of input about what the schools are gonna look like next from lots of different stakeholders, and I wanna make sure that we're not missing opportunities to, and maybe it's not you, maybe this is somebody else at MMSD who can kind of take point on like, okay, we're going into the future and what are we leaving in the past? And I don't mean what are we not doing, but like, what are the experiences of people who we're Sherman students 50 years ago, and how do we not lose sight of that as we make these changes? Both because I want to respect the history and because I want to learn from the history. I'm thinking a lot about like, where do I, as an individual, where do communities draw strength for the future from, right? Draw strategy for moving together through hardship together. And I think a lot about like knowing what happened locally makes a big difference for me, knowing how we can survive together into the future. So I don't know that this is you, but this is something that's on my mind when I hear about the referenda facilities projects. They're so exciting. And like that, I'm still looking for the who's gonna like put me at ease that there's instructional plans that go with these facilities plans. Both in terms of like, and I've heard lots of reassurances that we're not gonna renovate elementary schools while they're full of elementary school students. I've heard that and I believe that. But like, and I've heard lots of times our building services department does amazing things working with students so that they can come and see and come and look and come and learn, having internships and stuff when students are older and more available for that kind of thing. But I'm still not like, I still don't have like total faith or total comfort or confidence, I guess, that like we're not just like kind of doing business as usual in the instructional side while we're making all of these huge changes. And I've heard a lot like, oh no, these flexible spaces and these changed spaces are going to allow for the teaching of the future. And I believe that, but I'm still kind of like, okay, but what about the during? And I'm thinking about, we heard from our from school staff last week about like how the EL curriculum is working and how cool it is that it's the most magnificent thing and students are excited and engaged. And then we have out my window, maybe a whole new school is going to get built. And so there's going to be a departure from our EL curriculum because we have an opportunity now to be focused on this. And I haven't yet heard, again, not you, just putting in the room, I haven't yet heard like real assurances that like, okay, if you're a school that's being renovated next year, your professional development plan is significantly different than the professional development plan of the other elementary and middle schools or whatever. To allow for that week of conversation, like, hey, how are we gonna embed what we see out our window? How are we gonna, in our curriculum, how are we gonna like have support to go and talk to community members as third graders about, okay, we're rebuilding or renovating the school. What was it like when you were there? How are we using that question in our social studies units? And I can't answer that. You can't answer that, right? Nobody can answer that except for like the instructional staff at the school where that's happening. And I haven't yet heard that come together for me yet. And these are just like all of them, like fears and anxieties coming out. But the headline should be, this sounds really cool. I'm super excited. And I'm super excited to hear what you said about where OPN architects are in terms of the sustainability statewide. That's super exciting. I'm gonna stop talking and I don't need any responses because I was just telling y'all how I feel. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Board Member Pearson.
Yeah, sorry, I just thought of one little comment that I thought of actually earlier today. I would like, and this is just, I would like to see for whoever we choose to start crafting the spaces and work with those folks, ways that we can always include the community with our schools, because as we have been moving towards many of our schools becoming community schools, and we've seen the success with our, like some of our middle schools and elementary schools who have community centers in them, and the usage and the potential usage after school has ended, and kind of finding those spaces where the community can also utilize the space. So although we're thinking about the schools for our students and our educators and our staff, but what does it also look like that we're thinking about the space for our community to also be a part in it? And we've seen very successful models like Badger Rock is one thing I can always think of because I'm always at their dinners and things like that. And so like that was just, it's a hope that I would like to see in where, like, all of our schools that we're building, just because I do think it offers us for the future as well to have that pride that Blair was mentioning earlier, and see some of that resilience come up. So.
Half of our discussion last week in our retreat with the OR and AE was just that.
Okay.
50% of our time is instruction.
Mhm.
50% of our time is community-based.
Mhm.
Whether it's MSCR, whether it's a weekend event, or it's a community center, that space is not just a school.
Mhm.
It's their community. It's our city. It's who we are as Madison. So that's been a part of our big discussion, and putting all of that together and make sure the space is accessible, not only to separate instructional a little bit on times that it's rented or whatever, or as a community space, but also have that little distinction between those two sectors so we don't have interlap potential other issues.
Yeah, thank you. And that's it.
Thank you. Board Member Simkin?
Thanks. So this is exciting, but we're actually getting to talk about it. I want to thank all my fellow board members. You said most of what I was thinking. There was just one more layer on that. When we're thinking about now, architects are drawing up things and we have the sustainability vision. And just thinking about not just what's already in the schools as far as, you know, desks and things like that, but infrastructure that can be recycled or reused. I just want to make sure that we're hearing about those things. That is a focus, that if there's things that we don't need to be putting in a landfill, that our community can be assured that we're not doing that, and that we're getting these great reports about creative ways that we're reusing all this material.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second, Maya.
Board Member Fernando, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned.
Are we breaking before the close?
Yeah.
Yeah, can we?